Welcome back to our journey looking at the people who are responding to John's message. And what we see in Luke chapter 3 are four groups of people who respond to John's message. And the first group that we're looking at are these religious leaders who've rejected John's message because they think they can rely on their own ideas. And in Luke 3 verse 8 we see that there's this picture given to us that the Creator God who formed humanity out of the dust of the earth can create people again if he wanted to. And the challenge is that we were created from dust, we'll return to dust, and therefore we need to live as we were created to live in the first place. We were created to give off the aroma of life and not the aroma of death. And John is challenging this false confidence that the religious leaders have. And he's challenging them because he's bringing them back to this sense of realising again that they need to come before the Creator and get a proper perspective of who they are. But instead what we see is these religious leaders think that they have a right to God's salvation because they're descendants of Abraham, that they are the children of Israel, the children of promise, and therefore because they're the children of promise, that John's message doesn't apply to them. There's actually an interesting theological question that again is another source of debate for the church, and that is over the chosen people, the people of Israel. And the question that is debated sometimes in the church today is, are the children of Israel still God's chosen people today? Or what's sometimes called replacement theology, in that has the church replaced the children of Israel as God's chosen people? In other words, are the church the new Israel? This is a debate that rages within the church, and I'm happy again, as I'm always happy with Bite-Sized Bible, is to present the arguments and allow you to make your own choice. At the heart of this is a question that we need to approach from an understanding that God is faithful to his promise. And as we ask ourselves this question of whether the children of Israel are still God's chosen people today, we need to realise that when God promises something, God is faithful to his promises. He doesn't break his promises. And I don't know about you, how have you experienced God's promises? Have you had promises that haven't seemed to be fulfilled? Do you struggle to see God as the God who fulfills his promises? The God who keeps his promises? Sometimes I think we live in the in-between, that we receive a promise, but because it hasn't come yet, sometimes we can lose hope. And what I want to invite you today is to realise that actually God is faithful to his promises. And if God has made promises to you, he is faithful and just to keep his promises. And I want to invite you today not to lose hope in the promises of God.